I know that there are some very distinguished people who want to be supportive of me. Some of them may feel like they're playing the odds, but the reason I suspect is that they're more scientifically and minded and more accurately inclined than run of the mill um, armchair jurists. I wanted to address this comment to them concerning people taking offense. People taking offense has a long history as an issue of political judgment. In the New Testament, I believe it says somewhere, ye who say thou fool is in danger of hellfire, meaning when you insult somebody, they're likely to get angry. Now, there are persons of great strength who are aware that I don't feel the world, the human race, is a battle between good and evil, or holiness and evil, I suppose, is a better dialectic, or God and Satan, because God trumps Satan in theory. Maybe that's why we say good, is because man is not holy. By the same token, it's very unusual for men to become evil. So I see the predicament of the human race a little bit differently. I consider myself a humanist. Franklin Graham called humanists the greatest threat to democracy since communism. What that says to me was that communism was no great threat to democracy after all. Herbert Agar, the editor of the Southern Review, talked about the communistic practices of the Postal Service. He said, it puts bread and butter on the table and makes sure you get your mail. There are certain things that socialized government has reason to provide everybody in a sustainable fashion. So, again, words are weapons when they become boogie monsters. I'm accustomed to being used as a boogie monster, but I'm not resigned to the judgment that I deserve it. And this brief tape is to explain why. There was a period when I was young, when I was under the influence of the free speech movement. Many people will say, well, that shows you how poor the free speech movement was, that Dick Gregory and the cast of hair would turn on a baby they raised. Well, it's not that simple. I did understand that shedding the hatred in the song Colored Spade from Hair was by taking the toxins out of it so that you could breathe the vocabulary that was being used. I always considered it a beautiful and memorable song. Now, we know that I was hit in the head, and this is what I'm getting to from the point of view of neuroscience. They used Burstyn, and they were a publisher's project engaged in hybrid civil war. On the cover of Bobby Kennedy's book, The Enemy Within, there's a cadaverous arm, as though from the film The Exorcist. The enemy within, in other words, takes a nasty turn to imply the evil in Lincoln. Evelyn Lincoln, I believe, was one of the names of the Confederate crowd around Lyndon Johnson, JFK. So we see the index to Burstyn, which was the name Edna Ray Galuli adopted to make the film The Exorcist, in a theme park of Hollywood military chauvinism, claiming that the enemy within is the spirit of evil in pornographic cinema. Well, okay. I can see the theological logic in such an idea, but to batter somebody into a neurocoma in order to disabuse them of the idea that playing spin the bottle with girls was fun, it's a little bit bizarre, to put it mildly. Well, we need to confront this problem. It came from Reagan, and it was diabolicism. The best way to confront this situation is to discuss it. Now, before the neuroplasm popped, when it did, I was in terrible pain. I was having seizures and ocular gyrations. One pupil would get real big and the other would get real little. I looked like a battered old Latino woman. And I saw the Fuhrer stare at me out of one of my eyes, because that was the look in the eyes of the man who did it to me, so called Casper. Well, I didn't like it. I mean, if I had had a film of it, you wouldn't like it. And it left a brand on my psyche. I think I know what's going on with this situation. But when I was in that condition, the reason I went to the Des Moines River to scream and scream was because I had what I call impacted vituperative disorder. Vituperation means when you spit nails, when you go into, they call it venting. It's when you're as if you're possessed. It's when you're burst and your enemy within breaks through the dike. It's when you're in danger of hellfire. Well, the way that I saw it was I have to find out what the problem is here. Now, they were using every medium they could possibly to tar and feather me. They were implying that I had defiant trespassed the girl. You mean emotionally and lovemaking? That's a cock and bull story. But what there was the cinders of evidence that I couldn't see. And I remembered fondly being tortured, kidnapped in a stolen car by the Pittmans. One of them was named Jimmy Pittman, I believe. Gary and Danny Pittman. And they held me in custody and gassed me. I was out in the freezing snow wandering away from school because I was afraid they would be waiting for me at school. And they found me anyway. I must have leapt out of the car at some point and walked a long way home. That's what I seem to remember. I've never really gotten that part. But slowly, I drew it up to the surface where you could see it. But the entire time, the gonzo speechwriter Adam Ozenstadt of Donald Trump's research division at Carnegie Mellon was selling freedom of speech for skinheads and so on. Why shouldn't we be allowed to talk? And they put on a program called Radio KKK in the studio theater where Ming Na Wen was getting her diploma, and made these sickening extractions from the time that I was held in custody as a child and battered and tortured horribly, and drew an official line. Yeah, sure, tied her up and porked her with a carrot, which was impinged as an overdub by a ventriloquist who saw to seeing me as a parrot, and then asked Jaime Carbonell, the master of mistranslation, what did that mean, Jaime? I should have been, if there were concerns that it was a true statement, that I was accessing 302 for my own safety and kept clearly explained conditions, kept in clearly explained conditions if they want to know what that statement was. And I would have finally been able to identify it as something that some people who kidnapped me to climax one and mercifully left me in the waiting room told me they did for fun with someone who was having fun. And everything that I saw of her afterwards with them suggested that that was true. So we've dispensed with Oswald the Lucky Rabbit now from the Coney Island of the mind of Jimmy Queerball, as they used to call me. Little Jim McQueebate. Well, when Adam Eisenstadt was pulling these things with Boom Boom O'Shea at the University of Pittsburgh, I was calling it insult therapy. I was trying to convince what I took for my friends that I was just trying to get them to laugh. But I didn't know what was coming out. I didn't know where it was coming from. And they granted me a somewhat irregular license to vent. I believe some of it was because they wanted to see their malicious experiment, and some of it was because some of them were my friends. It's very difficult to readjust to non sociopathic norms after being tortured so hideously and then held in custody under the threats and direct glares of the people who did these abominable things to me as a child, which was still going on. Nobody has ever really let me be free from them. So when I say that forbearance is called for, I don't mean to say we should roll back our freedoms of expression. But I think we should recognize the legitimacy of the point that it was therapy. I had to find out where this neuroplasm that was implanted meant, where it was coming from, and what sort of control force it was trying to exercise over me as a person, and as a signifier of what someone very powerful meant for the human race. When it comes to things that go on in politics, I've always said it's better to try to live a respectable, law abiding life, no matter what, than anything else. And so they called me a chosen one. Chosen by who? Who is the grumbling Swami who thinks they have the right to sacrifice a law abiding person for no good reason? That's very peculiar. And that it should be institutionally leveraged by so many in administration and power raises some very complicated questions about what we are planning to do with our civilization. The Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, the Biodiversity Agreement, the protection of ecological zones, no touch zones, is the beginning of responsible stewardship. We don't need to go into the comic book deal of the New Testament's self-destruct mechanism, which was clearly identified by the Axis for a con job pulled over the odds of American society. Instead, I think we need to go back to Herbert Agar's The Time for Greatness and find the meaning of sustainable Christian ethics as a basis for our civilization. He found it very simple. God created Jesus, and Jesus loved the common man. And so the common man was granted judgment, as it says in Micah 6:8.